right, so for next time, remember you're reading book one, just book one of Gulliver's Travels. So do not go beyond the voyage to Lilliput. We're only going to be reading book one and book four, right? So book one is going to be tiny people. Book four is going to be hyper-intelligent talking horses. So good times there. And Nick, you are up for the world building next time. So, but I assume it because you were asking me questions earlier, you're more or less ready for it. So, okay. So today, to begin, I want you all to consider the following question for a few minutes. What is a monster? Just give it a minute and see what the best definition of a monster you can come up with is. So what we're doing right now is we're just pondering what is a monster, right? Just take a few minutes. When you think you've got something, just go ahead and speak up. Yeah, Ashlyn.
A monster is someone or something that commits violent acts against another.
Okay.
I said a non-human creature that ignores or is ignorant of basic human values and beliefs.
Okay. So non-human, ignorant of human values. Okay. All right. What else y'all got?
I wrote, it's a creature, could be a person because sometimes people like call other people monsters, who plague or terrorize like humans.
Okay.
And then, or it could be like a lot of like, I'm trying to think of an example, but sometimes monsters are things that people don't understand or they fear, and they fear it because they don't fully understand it.
Okay. So I think, yeah, what links both of those ideas together is the idea of fear, right? Something we're afraid of. Whether for good or bad reasons. Okay, good. What else?
Awesome. I was gonna say like misunderstood.
Okay. Why did you go with misunderstood, Kathy?
Because like for me, I like to understand everyone.
Okay.
Like good and bad. And
Uh-huh.
I realized that sometimes monsters, they're doing these specific things because in their own head it makes sense and it's right to them. And so
Okay.
if you take the chance to understand them, then you can see why they're doing it, whether it's for good or bad compared to others.
Okay, so what is or is not a monster is a matter of perspective. Okay. Interesting. What else?
Doesn't have a moral code.
Okay.
Or they may have a moral code, but it may not be like Kathy said. To them it makes sense, but to others it doesn't.
Okay, so they operate by an alien moral code or alien to us. Okay. Anything else? Okay, so I want to talk a little bit before we get back into the text about sort of like the idea of the monster and of the monstrous with reference to history and to psychology. And then maybe try to apply some of that to the way we look at Caliban and Ariel in particular in the play. And also even maybe some of the human characters. So monster comes from the Latin word monstrum. And monstrum means to remind, warn, instruct, or foretell. Does this seem weird to you?
No.
Why not, Kathy?
Because when people portray, like, when they talk about monsters, they're trying to give you a lesson. Like, you don't want to end up like this.
Yeah.
Because they always come with negative aspects.
Exactly, yeah, there's usually some kind of lesson attached to the monster story, right? In particular, in the ancient world, the idea of the monster was, it was the way the gods gave notice of the existence of evil. Right, monsters existed to warn human beings about the existence of evil, or to instruct about the existence of evil. So, I don't know how much mythology y'all know, but can you think of some notable examples of monsters from mythology?
Medusa.
Okay, Medusa, yeah, good. Tell me a little bit about Medusa.
She was cursed to be a virgin. But
Uh-huh.
it was unfair. Because like Poseidon slept with her, but then so that angered somebody. I forget who it angered, but then so they cursed her.
Yeah.
Even though it was like he did it.
Yeah, she's sexually assaulted by a male god in the temple of
And then
Athena,
gets
yes. And
punished
she gets
for it.
transformed into a hideous monstrosity with snakes for hair, right? Okay. So that is a very kind of specific warning about certain kinds of behavior, right? Like if you violate certain taboos, right? Then you, human, may be transformed into something monstrous, right? Good. Can we think of other examples?
The Minotaur.
Okay, the Minotaur. Tell me about the Minotaur.
Gosh. So the Minotaur is a result of this queen sleeping with a bull
Uh-huh.
because the king pissed off Poseidon.
Yes, so Poseidon seems to be involved in a lot of these, yeah. Sends to Minos, the king of Crete, a white bull, intending that the king is supposed to sacrifice the white bull to him. The king decides, no, this is too nice a bull, I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to sacrifice a lesser bull to Poseidon. So Poseidon decides to inflame the king's wife with lust for the bull. She has sex with it and produces a monstrous creature with a bull's head and a man's body, right? Yeah, Kathy.
Oh, going back to like how I said monsters are misunderstood.
Uh-huh.
You all think Medusa is some like crazy lady, like hating men or like turning everyone to stone.
Uh-huh.
But everyone sees what she has as a curse, but it's actually a gift for her to protect herself.
Mhm.
And so that's another misunderstanding. It's not that she wants to hurt
Uh-huh.
people, she's just protecting herself.
Yeah, well, I think that, like, in the context of Greek myth, because we have to remember the Greeks were a ridiculously patriarchal culture, she is wrong and a monster. However, in light of, you can read the story, if we're reading the story with contemporary morals laid on top of it, then yeah, we can certainly interpret it in that different way, right? But yeah, to the Greeks, Medusa was straight up monstrous. Can we think of any others?
Draugrs.
What's that?
Draugrs.
Okay, what's a draugr?
A restless spirit found in like Norse mythology.
Okay, yeah, and draugr are these they're essentially people who are so attached to some material thing in the world, right, in Norse myth, that they continue to haunt the barrows in which they're buried long after their death, right? Do we notice any particular common theme in the monsters that we've already put up on the board here?
Don't,
Okay.
Don't be disrespectful in temple.
Yeah.
More exactly, don't be disrespectful in Athena's temple. The Minotaur, if a god gives you a gift and tells you to sacrifice it,
Uh-huh.
and don't have excessive greed.
Okay, yeah, so there are moral lessons attached to all of these, right? What else do we notice is perhaps similar about all of these? Like, even like if we think about, say, their bodily form.
Not normal.
Okay, not normal. Right?
Non-human.
What's that?
Non-human.
Sort of non-human, right?
Well, like Medusa and the Minotaur have animal and human qualities, but the dragon
Yeah.
is more or less
It's basically a walking corpse,
a
right?
zombie.
Yeah, so something that used to be human and is still in a recognizably human shape, right? If we think about other things, werewolves, vampires, right? A lot of these kinds of classic monsters, they're humans, or they look like people, but with some exaggerated or altered feature, right? So the monster, even like think about like the Cyclops, right, in the Odyssey. He is a gigantic man with one eye, right? So they are human enough to unsettle us. How many of you have read Beowulf before? Okay, I know you took, so everybody has taken Brit Lit 1 and has read Beowulf. Okay. Grendel, we're told, right, we're never told what Grendel looks like because he always strikes in the dark, right? But we're told that he is a descendant of Cain, right? So that he comes from this alternate line of human descent from Adam and Eve, right? So one can assume that Grendel in form is more or less basically human, right? Perhaps with some differences, right? But yeah, the reason the monster terrifies is because we recognize some element of ourselves in it. right? There's a book by Julia Kristeva called The Powers of Horror. So Kristeva argues that horror is based on this idea that she calls the abject, which is built, the whole thing comes out of Freudian psychology, right? In Freudian psychology, the subject, right, is the recognizable self. The object is that which the self acts upon or can act upon. And the abject is that which the self has rejected, right? So the things that Kristeva regards as abject, right, are, say, like things that were once recognizably part of a familiar human body. So, why do we experience, say, feelings of disgust when we see, hair clippings or nail clippings on the floor? There's nothing particularly disgusting about those things, right? They're not that dirty. They're not unsanitary, right? But they're rejected parts of a human body, right? The same reason why we feel afraid when we see a corpse, right? It's something that used to be a human body that isn't anymore, right? It's now something else. It's now something different. And this process works when we're looking at the monstrous as well. It's just it's more or less recognizable as human, but it's just far enough off to make us uncomfortable and to make us afraid, right? Whether, it has some animal features, or like a draugr or a vampire, it's a walking dead body, right? It's human enough that we see ourselves in it and it upsets us, right? So what I want to do now is look at the ways in which different directors and costume designers have imagined the characters of Caliban and Ariel. And I want to think about how this relates to our idea of the monstrous, right? Because at least the way they're written in the play, both of them are at least arguably monsters, right? In some sense. So let's start with Caliban.
All I could think of, like when I first read this and I saw Caliban, was I can't remember what year it was, the Clash of the Titans.
Okay, you're thinking of Calibos.
Right. Well, yeah, I kept thinking of Calibos every time I read it.
Yeah. It was a character who does not actually exist in Greek mythology.
No. That movie took a lot of liberties.
So this is from a Victorian production of The Tempest. This is the actor Frank Benson as Caliban. And what do you notice about the depiction here?
He's excessively hairy and scaly at the same time.
Okay, yeah, he looks both hairy and scaly, right? What? Go ahead.
Dirty.
Yeah, he looks, although some of that might just be the photograph is grainy, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, he looks non-human, right? So he's been interpreted here as this kind of hairy beast, right? He's holding, he's holding a fish here that it looks like he's going to gnaw on, right? Now I want to compare this to No, that's not the thing you were supposed to do. A depiction from the 1950s. What do we notice about this Caliban?
He seems more nonchalant.
Okay, yeah, he less aggressive, right? He's just kind of lying. He's lying there at rest, face impassive. What else do we notice about him that's different from the previous Caliban?
Is that a wing?
What's that?
Is that a wing on his arm? Or is it like his arm is raised and that little, yeah.
Yeah, they're like gills or something
Yeah.
behind him. Yeah, so he's got like these fins.
So he looks a lot less human than the last one.
Yeah, less human, like almost, yeah. They've taken the kind of fish-like qualities that Stefano mentions in the play, right? And they have exaggerated those here. Now, I want to look at a couple more contemporary Calibans. This is from 1978.
More human.
Yeah. In fact, is there anything recognizably non-human about this Caliban?
I mean, like his head, you can tell it's got like some texture, like it might be like not a normal bald head.
Yeah, like maybe some kind of like scarification or something, yeah. But otherwise, yeah, this Caliban looks human, right? As does this quite recent Caliban from I think 2009.
He looks like a priest almost,
Uh-huh.
not some creature. He looks more human and almost like he's giving you like old priest vibes. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
Like
Yeah, he's an
bells and the-
Yeah, he's an old man here, right? Which seems unusual. And yeah, he's fully clothed. And there is nothing about him now that is recognizably inhuman, right? Now I want to compare this to some depictions of Ariel over the course of theater history. So here we have Ariel in the center of the stage. This is from, I think, the 1910s. And we have Caliban as this kind of hairy, he looks kind of like Gimli, right, from the Lord of the Rings movies. He's just like this hairy thing crouching in the corner. And we have Stefano and Trinculo here, plotting their revolution. And Ariel comes in, like dressed demurely as a maid, playing a flute and a drum to lead them away, right? This is from 1960. This is the actor Roddy McDowell, who is most famous probably for the Planet of the Apes movies. What do we notice about this?
more fantastical.
Okay.
Definitely less human.
Yeah. I mean, certainly human-shaped, right?
Yes, but humans don't have antennae.
Yeah, he's got antennae. What else is weird about him?
The stuff on the chest.
Some kind of weird fringe on his chest and down to his abdomen. Yeah, uh-huh.
And then, like whatever's coming out of his back and his arms and his head.
Like the coral is kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, it does look a little bit like coral, right, coming off. So he looks almost like kind of like both airy and aquatic, right?
And you can see like the texture of his skin isn't like normal human
Yeah, it looks like they've probably, it looks like they've shaved all his body hair off and stuck something on him, right? Yeah.
Pointed ears,
Pointy ears, yep.
long fingernails.
Uh-huh. So these are more recent. This is from a, I think 2010 production in New York City. What do we see here?
Wings, metal wings,
Okay, yeah, he's got a big pair of metal wings, right?
attached to a very human-looking body.
Attached to a very human-looking body, sure.
But he also looks very aggressive too. Like, I
Yeah,
don't know if, well, like when I'm reading Ariel, he seems, Prospero tells him to go do something, he just does it, but he doesn't, those wings look like weapons.
uh-huh.
And he looks angry.
Yeah, well, and when we think about the way Ariel behaves in the play, too, right? I mean, yeah, like, he doesn't do anything directly threatening to Prospero, though, as we noted last time, he does get kind of pissed off when, you know, he feels that Prospero is extending his term of service, right? It's like no, like, this is, you promised to set me free. So I think, like, there should be something scary in the character as well, but a lot of what he's doing is transformations into terrifying things, right? And this is from a 2016 production in England.
He reminds me of Robin Goodfellow.
Okay,
Like,
yeah.
the way the hair
Uh-huh.
is colored and shaped, and the coloring of the costume, I'm not getting Ariel, I'm getting Robin Goodfellow.
Yeah, the character is actually kind of similar in a lot of ways. If you all are familiar with The Midsummer Night's Dream, the Puck, right, to Robin Goodfellow, yeah. The Puck is a willing servant of Oberon, and Ariel is, at least to an extent, unwilling. Just like it serves Prospero out of obligation and fear, not necessarily out of love. But what do we notice about the differences in the ways Ariel and Caliban are depicted?
Ariel's usually depicted as like an elegant monster, and Caliban's a rough monster.
Okay, explain. What do you mean by elegant?
More human-like and probably more attractive to the eye, where Caliban is instantly, before you even hear a line from him, you're afraid of him. You know, you have
Mhm.
Caliban who's covered in fur or
Uh-huh.
hair and scales and usually has a
Yeah.
grimace. And then you have Ariel who's, plain afoot
Uh-huh.
and
Although again, and I think like this is probably something that speaks to a similar thing to what you were talking about earlier, Kathy, with the way we understand, say, the figure of Medusa. Over time, which of these characters seems to develop a more human depiction, and which seems to develop a more alien depiction?
It seems like Caliban got more human, whereas Ariel got more
Yeah.
creature. What does the second one say under Ariel?
attractive.
Attractive.
Oh, attractive.
I think there's another difference in these depictions as well. Is Caliban ever portrayed by anyone other than a man? And it looks like, yeah, Caliban is always depicted as masculine, right? What about Ariel?
Ariel's been played by men and women.
Yeah. So yeah, the early Ariel we saw there was a woman, right? Now, in the text of the play, Ariel is explicitly referred to as he, right? So it's clearly envisioned as a more or less male spirit, right? But we see that the part is sometimes played by a woman. And again, if we look back particularly at this depiction And this one, they're a little androgynous, right? So while Caliban is always masculine, Ariel is usually depicted as a bit more androgynous or fluid, right? Now, how might this reflect the nature of the kind of monster Ariel is?
And his power is based on transformation.
Yeah, Ariel's a shapeshifter, right? Whereas if Caliban can shift his shape, right, we never see any evidence of that, right? As far as we know, Caliban just wears the one form all the time. But this also means that even though Ariel, at least in the text of the play, right, seems like the friendlier monster, because Ariel behaves in accordance with Prospero's wishes, which of these two does Prospero actually seem to regard as scarier or more dangerous? Which one does he need to keep a tighter leash on?
Ariel.
Yeah. Ariel's the one that he has to control, right? Caliban he seems to regard as fairly predictable, right? Relatively easy to bring into line. But Ariel is the one that he has to constantly kind of draw magic circles around and threaten with his power to get him to cooperate, right? So Ariel seems to be a being that is kind of both more dangerous and more alien, really, than Caliban is, right? Remember, too, like, what is the thing that Caliban felt like? How did Caliban lose Prospero's good graces? What did he try to do?
Take Miranda.
Yeah, so we can assume, at the very least, that Caliban and other human beings have, compatible organs, right? Whereas there's no such evidence of this really with Ariel. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't love it when the lights come on either. So, I think the reason that I wanted to draw this out here, right, is that I think that the character Caliban is coming from a more human place in terms of his creative origins than Ariel is, right? So we talked a little bit about this last time, about sort of how this play relates to European colonization in the New World, right? Now, we know that the play, as we noted, was finished, or more or less finished, by 1611. Right. This is when we have its first recorded performances. But in 1603, an English translation appeared of the essays of the French philosopher Michel de Montaigne. And one of Montaigne's essays was called of cannibals, right? That's the spelling in the 17th century English translation, right? Now, what do we notice about the title of this essay? What happens if we rearrange the letters in the second word a little bit? Yeah. What's that?
Oh, I was gonna say Ariel.
Yeah. If we rearrange, if we take out the E and otherwise, if we take out the ES and we otherwise rearrange the words here, right? We get the name Caliban. Now, when we think of cannibals, right? What springs to mind? Like what is the impression that we have associated with this word?
That you eat people.
People eating, yeah, typically. The word derives from an early European mispronunciation of the name of the tribe, the indigenous American tribe that gave their names to the Caribbean Sea, right? So they're called the Thekharibe. And they were particularly feared as warriors by their neighbors, in part because they had a reputation for eating prisoners, right? Now, Montaigne's essay doesn't go quite the direction you would expect it would, given that it's a European writing on cultures that his contemporaries see as violent and primitive, right? Montaigne is specifically writing about a people called the Tupanamba, who lived in what is now Brazil. And he describes certain cultural rituals that the Tupanamba attached to warfare, right? So the Tupanamba did eat prisoners of war. It was part of a kind of complex ritual in which the prisoner and his captors would taunt each other in song before the prisoner was like ritually killed and eaten, right? So he would taunt his captors by telling them, for example, how many of their relatives were inside of him before they ate him, right? So the basic point of Montaigne's essay is not to paint these people as monstrous or as uncivilized or as somehow less than human, right? What he is trying to suggest here, like this is actually one of the first examples in European thought that we have of what's called cultural relativism. And this again relates back to Kathy's idea of the monstrous often being something that we don't, what we regard as monstrous often being something that we simply don't understand, right? Anybody familiar with the term cultural relativism? Anybody ever heard this before? Yeah, middling? Okay.
Like, I've heard it in Dr. Ghosh's sociology classes.
Okay.
That is certain things are just relative to a specific culture. It doesn't make it necessarily bad.
Sure.
It's just that is part of that one group's culture.
Yeah, and that's the basic idea here, right? That value systems are culturally specific. And that you can only judge a culture by its own standards. right? So you can't look at a culture that is not your own and judge it fairly by your culture's standards, right? You have to understand what the standards of that culture are and judge people's behavior within that code accordingly, right? That's the only, to a cultural relativist, that is the only fair way to assess, anyone's behavior within a particular culture, right? And so I think what we get in Caliban is a character who is kind of like, just as he seems to kind of straddle the human and animal worlds in Shakespeare's depiction, he also does kind of straddle this kind of like depiction of the indigenous person as both potentially threatening to European interests. In particular, in Caliban's case in particular, to the potential creation of, quote-unquote hybrids with Miranda, right? That, he threatens her unsullied European innocence. But also, in the like that Caliban is artistically sensitive, as we started to note at the beginning of last class. If we turn to it's in Act 3. When Stefano, entry, page 107. So Ariel plays the tune on a tabor and pipe. Stefano, what is this saying? Trinculo. This is the tune of our catch played by the picture of nobody. Stefano, to the invisible musician. If thou beest a man, show thyself in thy likeness. If thou beest a devil, take us thou list. Trinculo. Oh, forgive me my sins. He that dies pays all debts. I defy thee. Mercy upon us. Caliban. Art thou afeard? No, monster, not I. Be not afeard. The isle is full of noises, sounds and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that, if I then had waked after long sleep, will make me sleep again. And then in dreaming, the clouds methought would open and show riches ready to drop upon me, that when I waked, I cried to dream again. So what does this speech show us about Caliban, right? Is this the surly Caliban who defied Prospero in Act 1? What is he showing us here?
He's being sensitive. He's sensitive to what happens on the island. He understands that, the music he hears is beautiful, but it also puts him to sleep.
Yeah. And induces dreams, right? So what we see here, right, is imaginative potential, right? And an aesthetic sensibility, right? He has a sense of beauty. Something that Prospero probably wouldn't give him credit for, right? Prospero wouldn't think that Caliban has any particular sense of beauty, right? That he's just this, he's this babbling thing that they found on, much as Miranda wouldn't acknowledge that Caliban may have had his own language when they landed on the island, right? She couldn't understand him, so she assumed that he was just babbling. But yeah, we see here that one, he understands the island itself better than any of these other people who have landed on it, right? He knows that these are, just kind of vision, these are things that the island does. But also, that he is more sensitive to the beauty of this place than the others are. Right? For Prospero, it's all just a trick. For Stefano and Trinculo, right, they're worried about danger. But for Caliban, right, this is what gives him dreams, right?
But it's also his home.
Yeah. Yeah, he and arguably Ariel are the only characters that are actually native to the island. Right? It's hard to say that Ariel, being a spirit, is native to anywhere, right? But Caliban at least is a flesh and blood creature who is at least half human, right? And I think it's probably a good idea if we didn't really talk about this character last time because she doesn't appear physically in the play, right? So who's Sycorax?
Caliban's mother
Yeah, she's Caliban's mother
and a witch.
and a witch, yes. How did she end up on the island?
Did she wash ashore there too?
Yeah, she was also an exile, right? She was exiled for witchcraft, right? She comes to the island, has a son. And where is she now? Yeah, she's now dead. Do we see here any kind of parallels with other characters? Who's her story actually kind of similar to? Yeah. She's a kind of AntiProspero, right? All right, I'm thinking of Prospero. Right, it's Miranda's father. Right. Miranda's not born on the island, but this is the only place she remembers, really, right? He's a wizard. And he is exiled and deposed due to his wizardry, right? Now, there's another place where these two stories intersect, and it has to do actually with Ariel. How did Ariel come to serve Prospero?
That Sycorax is stuck in it and forgot about.
Yeah, Sycorax stuck Ariel into a tree, right? She imprisoned Ariel. Physically. Prospero set Ariel free and then complicates this by binding him to service, right?
What does it mean by cloven hide?
So when something is cloven, does anybody know what that means?
Split in half.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, like a cloven hoof is a hoof that's split, right? So there does also seem to be a little bit of a magical double standard happening here, right? That the magic done by a woman is bad and creates monsters, right? Whereas the magic done by a man is good and restores the normal order of things in Western Italy, right? I think it might be a good idea if we look sort of towards the end of the play, these last two acts, and we see how all of this tries to resolve, right? So to stick with Prospero for a minute, right? So we talked about the mask as a court entertainment last time. What's the mask that Prospero puts on for Ferdinand and Miranda? What does it look like?
I mean, it looks like a blessing. He's having these three goddesses,
Uh-huh.
or these spirits appearing as these three goddesses blessing
Yeah.
Miranda and Ferdinand's marriage.
Yeah, it's basically, it's Ariel and lesser spirits shifting shapes again, right? And yeah, they're blessing the marriage, right? But I think it also does, it matters here which
Yes.
goddesses are invoked here, right? So we have three Greek goddesses, or Roman goddesses, Roman versions of Greek goddesses, right? Iris, Ceres, and Juno. And so do we know who all three of these goddesses were? Okay, who are they?
Iris is the goddess of rainbows and Juno's messenger. Ceres is the Roman version of Demeter, goddess of harvest. Oh no, Ceres is the
No, you were right,
This is
yeah.
I was getting Vesta is Hestia.
Yes.
So Ceres is goddess of harvest, and then Juno is the goddess of marriage, and the Roman version of Hera.
Okay, yes. Juno is marriage and family. So then what do all of these goddesses have in common in terms of the areas of life and nature they're responsible for?
I feel like I'm wrong if I say it, because I don't know how to connect Iris with Ceres or Juno. I'm thinking of like fertility.
Okay, and
Because
is
like,
there
like the land is fertile because of Ceres, and then Juno, like you can be fertile with.
makes the people fertile? Yeah, yeah.
I don't know about Iris. I don't know how to connect that with
Rainbows
that.
equal peace.
Well, think about when does a rainbow appear?
After rain.
Yeah, right? And what does the land need to be fertile?
Rain.
Needs rain, right? Yeah, so these are all, at least on some level, right, fertility goddesses who have been called in to bless a marriage, right? And if we look at the way Iris invokes Ceres on page 125, can I get somebody to just start reading from Ceres' most bounteous lady for us?
Ceres, most bounteous lady, thy rich leaves
Mm-hmm.
of wheat, rye, barley, vetches, oats, and peas, thy turfy mountains where live nibbling sheep, and flat meads thatched with stover them to keep. Thy banks with pine and twilled brims, which spongy April at thy hesped trims, to make cold nymphs chaste crowns, and thy grim groves, who shadow the dismissive bachelor loves, being last born, thy tall-clipped vineyard, and thy sea marge, sterile and rocky hard, where thou thyself dost air, the queen of the sky, whose watery arch and vesture am I. Bid thee leave these, and with her sovereign grace, here on this grass plot in this very place. To come and sport, her peacocks fly amain, approach rich Ceres, her to entertain.
Okay, yeah. If we look at like the way Ceres' kind of portfolio of duties is described here, right? It looks kind of a lot like the way Gonzalo described the uses he was going to put the island to, right? If we look, I want to give you another analog of this from the history of 15th and 16th century colonization. Let me see where the bit I'm looking for is. This is from Columbus's first letter back to Spain after landing on the island that is now Hispaniola, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. Let's see. And of course, like for some reason, when I'm looking for something, I can never find it. Okay, let's see. So he says, from that cape, I sighted another island to the east, 18 leagues distant, to which I then gave the name Hispaniola. And I went there and followed the north coast due east as I had done in Guana for a good 180 leagues, in a straight line to the east as I had in Guana. That coast, like all the others, is very rocky, and this one is particularly so. There are many harbors on the seacoast beyond comparison with any I know in Christendom, and so many good wide rivers that it is a marvel. The land is high, and there are many sierras and high mountains beyond comparison with the island of Tenerife. All most beautiful and of 1,000 different shapes, and all accessible and covered in trees of 1,000 kinds, and so high that they seem to reach the sky. And I am told that they never lose their leaves as far as I can understand, for I saw that they were as green and as beautiful as they are in Spain in May, and some were in flower and some in fruit, and some at another stage according to their nature. And there where I traveled, the nightingale and other birds of 1,000 kinds were singing in November. There are 6 or 8 kinds of palms which are a wonder to behold for their beautiful variety, as too with the other trees and fruits and plants. There are marvelous pine groves and broad meadows, and there is honey, and there are many different kinds of birds and many varieties of fruit. In the interior there are many mines of metal and incalculable numbers of people. Hispaniola is a marvel. The sierras and the mountains and the plains and the fields and the land are so beautiful and rich for planting and sowing, for raising all kinds of cattle, for building towns and villages. The harbors are beyond the belief of anyone who has not seen them, and the many great rivers give good waters of which the majority bear gold. There are great differences between the trees and fruits and plants and those of Guana. On this island there are many spices and great mines of gold and other metals. So what is he trying to do to attract the interest of the Spanish king and queen in this letter? What is he telling them about this place he's landed?
There's many resources.
Yeah.
Particularly gold and minerals.
Yeah, exactly. This place is loaded with gold, with metals, with trees and fruits, right? Like this is it's incredibly fertile and it's resource rich, right? Kind of in keeping with those ideas of the Americas as a kind of new Eden that we talked about last time, right? And then, when he begins to talk about the people, right, all the people on this island and all the others I have found or learned of go naked, men and women alike. Again, Edenic, right? Just as their mothers bear them, although some women cover themselves in one place with a leaf from a plant or a cotton garment, which they make for the purpose. They have no iron or steel or weapons, nor are they that way inclined, not because they are not well built and of fine bearing, but because they are amazingly timid. They have no other weapons than those made from canes cut when they are in seed, to the ends of which they fix a sharp stick, and they dare not use them, for many times I have happened to send 2 or 3 men ashore to some town to speak to them, and a great number of them have come out, and as soon as they see the men coming, they run off. So what is he trying to say about the people who live here? Are they just simple in his argument here?
No, they're not simple. Like they don't have any formal weapons as like the Spaniards would, but they do know how to fashion a spear.
Yeah.
but they choose not to use it
Uh-huh.
unless they need to, like for hunting and such.
Well, it's actually even a little darker than that, right? He calls them timid, right?
Doesn't it like empowered?
Yeah, that these are people who won't put up a fight, right? He's trying to sell the idea of conquest, right? To his sponsors in Spain. So he's telling them, this place is amazing, and you can roll right over the people who live here, right? Much in the way Prospero uses his magic, right? To force Caliban to do his bidding, and Ariel. And indeed, what is the outcome of Caliban's revolution? What happens when Caliban brings Stefano and Trinculo to Prospero's cave?
They kidnap the innocent. They fall for a Prospero's trap, even though
Mhm.
Caliban tells them not to.
Yep.
They're put under some spell. Spell. Do that.
Yeah, Prospero and Ariel make a noise of hounds, right?
Mhm.
Which frightens them off. Even though Caliban says, "Look, he's gonna make some noises, right? It's okay. Don't worry about it." But these guys buy the illusion, right? And don't listen to Caliban, right? So Caliban's revolution ends up being a bust. Now I think that there's a class dimension to that as well, right? We got a couple of potential overthrows here, right? On the one hand, we've already had, right, Prospero overthrown by Antonio, his brother, working with Alonso, the king of Naples. And now Antonio is trying to encourage Alonso's brother Sebastian to overthrow Alonso, right? He encourages Sebastian to murder Alonso in his sleep while the two of them are awake guarding him. Now, along the same lines, right, at the same time, Alonso's servants, Stefano and Trinculo, right, Stefano is Alonso's butler, which means he's his wine steward. And Trinculo, who is his jester, stumble upon Caliban, who offers to make Stefano king of the island, right? If they will help him overthrow Prospero. And all of these revolts fail, right? In fact, the whole tendency of the play seems to be towards a restoration of the previous status quo, with Prospero back on his throne in Milan, and Ferdinand and Miranda married to each other, and Prospero and Alonso are now allies rather than enemies. So, one thing I want to note about this return to the world here, as Prospero greets his enemies. If we look on page 151, Actually, let's strike it. Let's go back to 149 first. Right. Can somebody read to us the passage that starts after Prospero gestures with his staff, starting with "to work mine end upon their senses"?
To work mine end upon their senses, that this airy charms for, I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth. In deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book.
Thank you. Now, if we turn to page 151, Prospero commands Ariel to fetch me the hat and rapier in my cell, right? Ariel exits and at once returns with Prospero's ducal robes, right? So what does it seem Prospero has to do when we look at these two passages together to resume his former place?
Set aside being a wizard and take up his responsibility as the duke.
Yeah, he has to stop being a wizard, right? Stop being a wizard, just be the fucking duke, right? So, one of the big problems that has always been attendant upon this play is like how to interpret this. So, it used to be interpreted fairly literally and biographically. Back when people thought this was the last play Shakespeare ever wrote. And indeed, like a lot of the things in the final act sound like a kind of farewell to the theater, especially like Prospero's epilogue and things of that nature. But we now know that actually Shakespeare continued writing plays after the Tempest, often in collaboration with younger playwrights. So the idea of a farewell to the theater, right, doesn't quite, and a return to private citizenship, doesn't quite add up here. But I do think kind of there's something in maybe these connections between Prospero and Sycorax, right? Because what has Prospero largely used his magic to do while he's been on the island? To manipulate and dominate, right? Yeah. He has manipulated and dominated Ariel and Caliban.
And would you even say Miranda?
And Miranda.
Every time he goes to tell her about who she is, he works some kind of spell that puts her to sleep.
Yeah, he's kept her in this state of artificial innocence for 12 years, right? So yeah, he's used his magic to deceive and manipulate and dominate everyone around him, right? And I think, and this is just kind of the best I can come up with in like the last 40 seconds or so we have in class, right? I think that what's going on here is that in order to rule, right, in order to restore the status quo but improve upon it, he has to reject that kind of style of leadership, right? No more casting spells to push people around. You actually have to accept your human responsibilities. So we're probably going to see, as we look at Gulliver's Travels, some similarities, particularly in that both take a lot of their cues from travel writing. So let me give you the guide questions for Book 1 of Gulliver's Travels. And we'll be looking at that on Wednesday.